Hello, and welcome to The Confident Commit, the podcast for anyone who wants to join the conversation on how to deliver software better and faster.
If you're looking to build a testing ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.
You're listening to the finale episode of Season 2. I'm not your host, Rob Zuber, CTO of CircleCI, the industry leader for all things CI and CD. My name is Julia McClellan. I do a lot of the behind-the-scenes tasks of this podcast, and I have the pleasure of working alongside Rob to produce it. It's time Rob gets interviewed so we can hear what he's learned from this season, all focused on failure. Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Julia. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to go through this. We've had the pleasure of hearing stories from industry leaders from AWS, Turo, Docker, and so many more. Rob, why don't you give us a little bit of an overview of how this episode's going to go?
Much like we did at the end of season 1, the plan is to walk through some of the themes of the takeaways that we heard. You know, we absolutely got to hear a really broad spectrum of ideas, of fun stories. And I learned a ton. That's one of the reasons I love doing this is I get to talk to so many amazing people and just hear their own experiences, hear new ways of looking at things. And so I thought it would be fun to go back over that, pull out a few key themes. I mean, obviously we can't touch on everything, but give you reminders of some high points and some key takeaways. And then at the end, we'll talk a little bit about what we're going to do for the next season.
Love it. Yes. Season 3 is going to be awesome. Rob, okay, so why don't we start with a couple of our favorites right off the bat. Best ways to restructure your team, language, and practices so your team can grow from failure. Who were some of the most notable episodes in regards to that topic?
Yeah, I think there's this underlying theme that came out around just how we talk about this, right, and how we work with failure. And a few of the folks, our own Emma, who talked about talking about it. You know, Emma Webb runs communications here at CircleCI. That was super awesome. Lisa Galopter talked about more than I could truly explain. It's hard to put that one into words. Yeah, I struggled in the episode. I struggled now, but just. So many different perspectives, different, how people's backgrounds and histories and personal experiences lead to them then both having conversations about failure, experiencing failure, being rewarded or not for failure. And then Nora Jones, who, spends all day, every day thinking about this topic from an operational perspective. And not only talked about that perspective, but I'm pretty sure we have some examples of giving me some fresh perspective. So excited about all of those.
All right. So Rob, let's start by listening to a little clip from Emma Webb's episode, and you can give some of the insights you got from it.
I do have kind of, if you are writing an incident report, I think there's a formula to it, Rob. So I'm going to share it with you, and I want you to tell me. I want you to tell me if you think this is right. But this is... I think if you're writing the incident report, there's basically, I think there's 4 things you got to hit. One is, I know what happened and why. 2, I have a path to fix it. We can make it better. I know how to prevent it in the future, because we know the fix isn't always the same as the prevention. And I think with prevent, there's probably, I learned something here that makes us all better. Therefore we have. And then the last one, which I remember one time, probably 4 or 5 years ago, we wrote an incident report and we forgot this one. And so it's so stuck in my mind that I have written it into our incident communications guide. But the last one is in some version of I'm sorry and thank you, which sometimes feels very implied. But I remember one time it was so implied we missed it. And we got a bunch of people saying like, well, what about the sorry?
Hearing that, obviously, from someone that's within the company you work at and work with all the time, what did you take from that?
Yeah, well, great point, because I have the fortune of working with Emma on these topics all the time. But one of the things about great communicators is they're really great at summarizing and articulating the things that, as she says in that clip, of maybe become implied over time. And so I think the emphasis there, anything that you think is implied is probably not clearly implied to everyone. So explicit is always better. And B, the empathy component as we talk about, especially, that was with respect to speaking publicly, as we talk about the issues that we're having, acknowledging first and foremost, there's a reason we're talking to you about this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's the implication. If we didn't care, we wouldn't be writing this in the first place, right? We wouldn't be talking to you about these issues, but we should be really clear. I think, oh man, I totally want to make a joke about being Canadian now because everyone likes to mock Canadians for saying sorry all the time, but like, it's a lost art,
Mm-hmm.
People write really cagey, I apologize that you felt that way, like things that don't really, and like being just genuine. And conveying what you may already be thinking about yourself is such an important part of communications. Is an important part of communications in these particular situations. And that's the extreme. We're talking about an incident where we're writing public comms, and that's usually a sign that it was big and impactful and was had impact on many of your customers, et cetera. But in a lot of the season, we talked about really, really small failures. Like, how do we do something like a quick experiment where we're testing a hypothesis, and knowing that even in those situations, you may be having impact on your customers, or you may be leading to a negative experience, depending on what you're trying. And just being really aware of that, of what we do every day is important to people, and we need to communicate with them on that level and help them understand how much we understand, the importance of what we do.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, speaking on that of people experiencing failures and everybody experiencing them differently, I think that's a good segue into talking about Lisa's clip, which we can play now.
It wasn't until I got to the White House where I was like, oh, okay. Like, nobody can take my resume away from me. Nobody can be like, you're just complaining about not being successful or about failure because you're a woman, because you're black. Right. And so, like, if you take my resume empirically, like objectively, it looks successful. But it is, even just saying like, oh, but this thing happened to me makes me feel like a failure, like out of control, like the victim, and it's really, really hard. And I just wanted to say that out loud because it's one of the things that, like, we can talk abstractly about failure, but the fact of the matter is, just saying that made me anxious and nervous. Even though I'm super successful, I was like, oh, but now people will think this way about me.
The thing that's most interesting, I mean, you have to go, like, if you're waiting for me to recap the whole episode, please go listen to that episode. Lisa is an amazing person. Just spoke so openly about so many things. But one of what's coming out for me in this particular moment, listening to that, is the feeling like a failure. And it's one of the things that I was trying to deconstruct a lot this season, was separating failing or failure from being a failure, right? Like, especially we talk about hypothesis, I'm experimenting, I'm just trying to learn something. I know that I might not have the answer. All of those situations are not only acceptable, but how we should operate. Like, we should know that we're trying to learn, and we're going to try things that aren't going to work, but now we have new information, right? And this feeling that she's expressing so well of, I did a thing, it didn't work out, and now that makes me feel either personally like a failure, or people are looking at me like a failure, which just landed so well for me, or I mean, not well is probably the wrong word, but like, was so impactful in really expressing that, right? Really expressing that it's not easy for everyone to get away from that feeling. And for many people, like, as Lisa's describing, it may be harder structurally or systemically to end up feeling like it's totally okay for me to do that. And that's something that we have to continue to work at as leaders, is creating the space. I guess I'll say as leaders, as a society, anyway, you want to think about it, creating the space for people to really be able to try and to fail. But again, in the sense of, I'm trying and I'm learning, not I should have known how to do this, perfectly the first time, because none of us know how to do something perfectly the first time.
Yeah. I love Lisa's emphasis on like saying even talking about my failure in this moment is making me feel that like that shame and that insecurity. Like that is so impactful of how we approach failure in leadership, as like within the culture of a company. All of that matters so much. And honestly, like this episode was my favorite of the whole season. I will say, like to your point earlier, if you haven't heard it, this is the one we'll plug the most. Go listen to that episode. Why don't we move into talking about Nora's episode and incident response and how that kind of plays into our response to failure?
The script needs to flip, and Jelly, instead of calling them incidents, we call them opportunities. And there's little psychological things like that can make them more delightful and more fun and open up like the psychological safety for people to talk about them. Because when you're growing that psychological safety and you're growing that learning environment, you're ultimately raising your performance standards. So you'll get things done faster. You'll get the right things done faster. People will work together better. So I feel like there's this miss with a lot of, the tech industry and focusing on, wow, this incident cost us this much money. We had 90 customers complain. Some of them were on, tight SLAs with us and are paying us a lot of money. And now we have to go on this apology tour. But it's like they're missing what happens with that internally. And they're not capitalizing off of that because there's so much rich data in how we speak with each other as an emergency is unfolding. And it can tell you a lot about how your organization, the difference between how you think your organization works versus how it actually works. And surfacing that delta can just lead to amazing things.
You were telling me earlier that from this episode, something actually changed for you, what you took into your incident response. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so there's a couple things. Speaking of things not going to plan, that was the second time we recorded with Nora, and I don't remember where this particular item came up, whether it was in the first pass or in some pre-discussion or in the second attempt. So it may not actually be in the episode, but regardless, we were talking about investigation, like post-incident investigation. And for anyone who hasn't looked at it, on the Jelly site, there's an amazing write-up on how to get more rich knowledge out of your incidents. And we thought, we sort of retooled a bunch of stuff that we do based on that. But one of the things that came up specifically in the episode was I was talking about having these conversations with folks, and Nora was basically like, you can't do that, because of power dynamic structure, trying to, that's, psychological safety, which she creates or speaks a lot about creating in that clip. And really, ultimately as a leader, I want to create that environment inside of our organization, the environment being one where there's lots of people who can go do this. But an approach that I often take is, I'm not sure how to do this well, let's go do it together and sort of figure it out. But becoming more self-aware that like, it's not going to work if you're in the room. Like we can't even have the right conversation because we're trying to get to a place where people feel super comfortable. And, I like to think that I'm approachable and everyone likes to think that they're approachable, but it's just something that, titles do this to people.
Well, Rob, I think that touches on our next theme that we're going into, is that it's never too late to improve. It's never too late to improve the process, small iterative changes. So talk to me about the people that we talked to here and what were the highlights?
Yeah, so we talked to a few folks. We talked to lots of people about, failure on the whole, I guess, and then looked at some specific or had some specific conversations where people were really getting into, thinking small, iterating, using that sort of notion that you're probably wrong as a model to get to right. But then in one particular conversation with Justin from Docker, we had sort of the big question, like, what if we're super far off? How do we stop and say, whoa, like, yeah, we didn't quite iterate ourselves here. We let ourselves go too far down a path that actually we're realizing isn't working. And we needed to make a big adjustment. which was a different perspective, but a really cool way to look at it. The other two folks were also Justin from yes,
we had two Justins this season.
I know, from Amplitude. I was going to forget that. So the other two folks were also Justin from Amplitude, and then Randy Schaup, who talked about his experience at eBay and really trying, in that case, again, an adjustment, not trying to change the business model per se, but trying to go back and invest in building this kind of culture at an organization that's been around for a long time and has some, has become a little bit set in their ways, right? I think like it's, as someone who's worked in a lot of startups, it's nice to, to get a fresh start. But sometimes you have a big successful business, but you have to change some things, and it's hard to shift, large scale historical culture and, how to do that. And even not just building an incremental culture, but building an incremental culture incrementally. Like, how do I take a small sample and demonstrate that something works before trying to roll out big change? Because I think any of us who've been through large scale rollouts know that they don't work.
Well, let's get into the clips, Rob.
As a software developer, it's just more fun to deliver quickly.
Oh my gosh.
It's more fulfilling and rewarding, right?
It's so much more fun. And you're asking such good questions that I never even got to the punchline. So the punchline is, last year we work with 10% of the teams using the metrics we talked about, using the questions that I talked about, using the tools that I talked about. And those 10% of teams, so think 300, 400 engineers across a cross-section of eBay, we were able to double their productivity. So holding the team size constant, holding the team composition constant, they produce twice the number of features and bug fixes that they used to do. And this is self-reported by the teams. And along the way, the teams are having way more fun.
So the thing I love about that clip is it starts and ends with this discussion of fun. And I acknowledge that it's me starting it, but no argument from Randy, right? Like, we did these amazing things. We have these business metrics, like lots of people can be excited about the outcomes. But at the end of the day, the people working in that manner are excited about the outcomes. Yes, because they feel, connected to the business and they want things to succeed, but also because it's just rewarding, right? It's like great to show up every day and work in an environment, leaning back on some of the other points where you have this psychological safety. I'm able to grow, I'm able to learn. And all of that is actually driving business results. So people are happy about it, and I'm happy about it. And when everybody's happy, that seems like a good thing, right?
Totally. I mean, I know I have fun working at CircleCI, and I won't just say that just because you're the CTO, but oh man. Okay. This one is about risk. Let's play Justin's clip.
The way that we talk about the things that we ship, we call them bets. Because we recognize that there's some risk to it, right? There's a payoff that we want to see, but some bets are going to fail. Like, it's a bet, like that's by design. Some bets have less risk. Some of them, actually, it's pretty clear kind of what the value is, but maybe the upside isn't that great. And some are really big bets. Like, this could easily fail, but we want to take that bet because we think the upside is huge. And we'll talk about that. It's kind of like taking a VC mindset. Like, if you're a VC, you kind of recognize that most of your companies you invest in at the end of the day aren't going to work out. But 1 out of 10 of them are going to give you a 10x return. Product is very similar. Like, most things you build aren't going to change the world or change your universe or change your industry or wherever you're working. But like, if you can get 10% of them too, that's a massive payout. So you got to create an organization that's willing to place those bets to get that return.
Rob, is that 10% motivating to you?
Well, I think what's actually motivating is the 90%. Not to just flip the math around or whatever. But like, yes, I love the idea that 1 in 10 of the things that I'm going to do is going to have a really big impact. But what's really motivating is that 90%, that I can get comfortable with 90% failure, right? Or 90% kind of low impact. I mean, Justin does a great job comparing that to VC. I think I might have said this in that episode. I'm not sure how many people follow that model, but if your portfolio beats the market, then that's a success. no one's going to say, oh, but you invested in this company and that failed. Like, that's the model, right? The model is I'm never going to be good enough or accurate enough or have enough data or information in advance. Good's too judgy to be able to say, well, let's just bet on the winners, right? We all know that doesn't work. And so what matters is over time, I come up with enough winners that all the non-winners don't matter, right? And I think it's a great way of framing the whole notion of experiments and exploration and hypotheses, and also a great call out to just choosing language, right? Which, Nora talked about that with respect to opportunities versus incidents. In this case, Justin talking about bets, right? Like, we're making a bet. I mean, take it to the most extreme and think about poker. Like, you don't win every hand. You just win enough hands to take all the money off the table, right? And then you're the winner in the end. It's not like sometimes you just get dealt crappy cards. Sometimes you have bad information. Sometimes you make small mistakes, but ultimately, you're making enough of the right decisions, and learning from your other decisions. And, the thing about poker is sometimes you make all the right decisions, you still lose because someone had different cards, whatever. So like the market changes, right? We make really great decisions about launching a product and then the market shifts and it doesn't work out the way we expected. That's fine if you get hung up on, we need to be better and better at predicting versus we need to make small bets and use that to learn. Then you actually slow yourself down versus being able to accelerate. I think the whole model of the mindset that he describes in there is super healthy. And again, I think, choosing words that really frame that for people is undervalued.
I love that. So, that does lead into the next Justin's clip of rethinking what you're doing, little decisions, stop, acknowledge you're failing, like all of those things that you're talking about. And I'm curious too, like staying motivated in that as well has to be a challenge. So let's listen to Justin Cormack's clip.
That critical thing of like you're on a path and you think that it makes sense, and you have got to reflect and think like, is this actually, am I making use of all the things I've got that I could be making use of? And I think that was kind of Docker had built this amazing community of millions of users, but we were building a product for a few thousand of them. Like, there's a big mismatch there. And I think that thinking about like, if you take stock of your sort of where you are and your opportunity, are you actually making use of the things that you have built and you have around you? And like this fantastic community was this enormous asset for Docker, and it's we're helping so many people by building tools for them and giving them tools, and like, but if we don't we don't make use of the feedback we get from these people, if we just deal with a small subset of them, it doesn't really make use of that at all. And so I think standing back and thinking, how am I helping all my users? How am I, how am I different from someone else in this situation? Because I think that we were kind of doing a strategy that someone who wasn't Docker could have done. In fact, lots of people were doing the same thing as we were. Like, we weren't making use of the uniqueness of our situation at all for that. And so I think that kind of process of reflection where you sit there and you think like, what do we have that we are not using? What could we be doing differently? Like, that is really important.
So Rob, that was the first episode that we recorded in season 2. And I remember when we first recorded it, it was like, we named it Docker's Big Shift. That basically saved them. But now looking back on it, does it still feel the same? Does it still feel like it was that massive shift?
No, it doesn't. I mean, the outcome feels big, but I think one of the most sort of consistent takeaways and topics throughout the season was developing an experimental mindset, like moving away from, oh, we tried to do a thing and we failed, and into, we're exploring options, and this one turns out isn't going to produce the results we want, so we're going to go explore another option, sort of thing. Right. And so on that scale, like, yes, it's still a big a big shift, but it's actually a shift in perspective more than a shift in kind of investment, right? They didn't go back and start over, but rather said, you know what, we thought this was going to be the value. It turns out we have built value. It's just not the value that we keep talking about it. If we focus on that value, which is the community, all the users that love it, versus what they thought was going to be their business, like we've already built a successful business. We just haven't realized the returns from it. If we look over there, we're off to the races. And I think, again, on that perspective front, we sort of, and I think this came up in a few episodes, we overemphasize, the visionary, this person who knew from the beginning what they were going to build. And the reality is there's not really anyone like that. And that willingness to always be open to other possibilities, to say, okay, we're trying this, but maybe it's over there, or to stop, right, being so far along and acknowledge, you know what, we actually have done something great. It's right there. Let's go capitalize on it. It's a different version of the story, but I think it makes it feel much more in that we haven't failed. We're just looking in the wrong direction, and there's the thing we need to do right there.
Yeah. Can I put you on the spot and ask about a time where you've experienced something like that?
Oh, where I was too far down a path and then realized that I was actually oh goodness.
Tell the people, Rob. We want to hear.
From my own experience, I joined CircleCI through the acquisition of a company called Distiller, which was a CI and CD platform for mobile. And we got there because we were building mobile applications and said, hey, the tooling isn't quite right here. Let's support ourselves with some tooling. And then sort of, we realized, okay, mobile apps are sort of like hit and miss. We were experimenting in a bunch of different areas. And I would like to say we had a pretty experimental mindset going into that. But we were trying mobile app after mobile app after mobile app. And then we said, I wish we could build these faster, right? I wish we had the tools to support trying to put something out into the market. And then we said, wait a second, we can't be the only ones who are having this problem, right? So we Jim, who's our CEO, and I, luckily we live in the Bay Area, and we literally just walked around downtown San Francisco knocking on doors and saying, would you like to have better, mobile app tooling? And everyone was like, please save us from this, from this mess.
Insurance salesman.
Totally. It's a little embarrassing, but like you could literally go door to door in the Bay Area. I mean, yeah, we knew we would send an email in advance, but it kind of felt like it. Like we would get together, meet in the city, and go, company to company, and just sit down and say, hey, we've stumbled across this problem that we're having, and we want to solve it. Would this be useful to you? And the answers were so quickly, resounding yes, that we decided to put our energy into the tooling side of it versus the apps that we were building. And so I think it wasn't that we already had something, like in this case, Justin was describing, they were already well down this path and just kind of leveraging it in the wrong way, if that makes sense. Whereas for us, it was like, we set out to build mobile apps thinking there was probably something there. This is like 2014, and then realized there is something there, but it's not more mobile apps, right? It's actually that everybody's trying to build mobile apps, and there's this really critical piece missing. And then once we shifted onto that path, the reinforcement came quickly, whether it was going to meetups, dropping by people's offices, looking on Stack Overflow. Like we just had all this information that said, oh yeah, there's something here. And then we went to pursue that and ultimately realized it could be part of a bigger puzzle, which is how we ended up at CircleCI.
I love that story. Okay, Rob, so let's shift into talking about some of our top failure stories from the season. Every episode, we asked our guest to tell us about a time that they felt like something happened that was the most catastrophic feeling in the moment, but ended up teaching them a powerful, vital lesson. Rob, why don't you tell me about some of your favorites?
Yeah, this was totally my favorite part of the season, was all these stories, and everyone had so much to bring, but definitely a few that I will call out because they were, a little unique or a little bit of an interesting angle. And I'm going to start with Chandler from AWS, who totally caught me off guard. I didn't know what he was going to talk about. And I think I had, was in the headspace of software and whatever. But let's play the clip and then I'll follow up with my thoughts.
When I got older, I actually raised money for some of my own wells. And and did this. And there's no more catastrophic feeling in your stomach at all than driving 12 hours home from central Kansas back to Denver after drilling a dry hole. And not just losing your own money, but losing investors' money. Like, that is a moment of reflection that I don't think very many people have. And it feels extremely catastrophic at the time. And you're thinking, what went wrong? We talked to all these geologists. We had a combined 250 years of experience in the Kansas oil industry telling us this was going to be a good location, and it's still a dry hole. And you learn a lot about moving past those failures, learning, but like, that's part of the game sometimes, is failing.
I did not expect that story when he shared it.
No, he started into it, and I was just like, where is this going? Because I don't even, what's great about it, and he talks about this a little bit, is many of us don't even have the context to consider that's a thing that could have happened to you, right? If you're probably a listener of this show, you're in software or, related fields, and this is not a side project for you. And so it was really fun from that perspective. And then, for me, in particular, to think how malleable software is. Like, we can make really small mistakes, right? We can try things in a very experimental fashion. And we should be very thankful for that, because most engineering disciplines work on very, very large scales of investment and in large, it can hardly call them increments. And so it even alludes to that. We talked to all these experts. We had all of these years of combined experience, and we're still wrong. Right. And just like, that's the lesson. No matter how many smart people you have and how much experience you have and everything else, like, there are always factors that are going to keep things from going perfectly. And so if you start from the position we're probably wrong, you make different decisions. You approach things in different ways. And I mean, I couldn't tell you how to approach things differently in oil, but I can tell you how to approach things differently in software. And we should be thankful for the fact that we can, which is to test as small as possible, draw a picture on a piece of paper and show it to some folks and say, what do you think of this? They're like, that's no good. You're like, great. That took me 8 seconds. Right? Like, how fast can I learn that I'm wrong so that I can start to close doors and get to the place that I'm going to do the right thing? Next up, we have Hector from Okta. Let's give it a listen.
People would basically get up at 4:30 a.m. without me telling them. And they would say, I'm going to be part of the watch party of Save OK2 today. And they would basically get up at 4:30 a.m. Pacific time. And then we would basically look, okay, customers are going in the system 5 a.m., which is 8 a.m. East Coast time. People start logging in, and we will see. And then at 6 a.m., boom. We just did not know what was going on. But anytime there was a problem like this, we would capture so much data that we would say, okay, we know that the way we're using the database in this particular way, eventually is going to fail. So how about we make the code resilient to that? So we assume that the database is going to fail. What happens? Assume no database. What are you going to do?
The thing I love about this is the reframing, right? We know something's failing, therefore we should fix it. Turns into, we know something's failing. We can't figure out how to fix it. So how do we build our system to just assume failure? And I feel like, it was an amazing story. You should listen to the whole story. But what I took away from it was, things are always going to fail. Right. And I think that's kind of, as he's describing it, the beginning of a reframing of thinking at Okta from, we'll find the failures and we'll fix them, and we'll find the new failures and we'll fix them, into, we'll make it so our system doesn't care if something fails. And I've heard this expressed in other ways by other folks, but like, components are failing all the time. The system must not fail. And recognizing that's the world we live in. Like, that's the world of the software that we're building. And if you continue to pursue that, I must understand this exact problem versus, be nice to understand that problem. But if the system keeps going, even when that problem occurs, I'm in a much better place. And the whole company doesn't have to get up at 5 a.m. to watch monitors. That's a much better takeaway.
At the end of this presentation, I was something that was to be eventually called the Nintendo Switch. And when I saw that and I learned about its features and what my team was intended to deliver as a part of those features, which was the Nintendo Network Account Service and other account substrates that would enable something different than what Nintendo traditionally used to connect players online, something called the friend code. I thought that it was like the worst decision that the company could have made. And I was very vocal about it within in that context. And I was like, why would we do this?
I mean, there's a great connection in here. We talked already about teams of experts and sort of saying like, this is absolutely going to work. This is kind of the opposite story in a way, where Tremel's saying, I know all this stuff about game systems, and I'm thinking to myself, this is an absolutely terrible idea. Of course, we all know how this turns out. Even I own a Switch, which is like, if you know my gaming history, will tell you something. And it's a little bit personal as well. Many years before probably this story, I was asked at a company that I was at to look at picture messaging and whether we should be investing in that as a platform. And I was like, this is never going to go anywhere. People are not going to send each other photographs on their phones. So I think you're also in the future now and can tell me how brilliant that was. But that, not just acknowledging like, we're going to have to put something out and learn. But in this particular story, also acknowledging like, hey, I learned something from this, like not about the Switch and the system and everything, but rather how I show up and participate in these conversations, how I can stop and think. I think the way that it played out was sort of, there's a lot of people who think this is a really good idea. Let me take a step back and think about, what am I missing? What could I learn from the folks around me, right? Like I have strong opinions. I think many of us have strong opinions. And when there's people you really trust suggesting things that run quite counter to those strong opinions or holding, it's not a good time to double down on your strong opinions. It's a good time to say, okay, I'm clearly missing something. Like, tell me a little bit more from your side, how you're seeing what we're thinking about here, and how can I grow and learn from that? And I just love the kind of personal growth in that story.
So this is the point in the season that I don't know about everybody else, but I've been waiting for. Rob, you've asked over 20 people the question of what's their most catastrophic failure. Now I get to ask you, Rob, it's time for your Red Build Rewind. Tell me about a time that felt catastrophic, but it ended up being a vital, powerful lesson.
Well, I don't know if this is the most catastrophic, but it was pretty rough, and I learned a lot. And I will lead with the takeaways so you can listen for them. But they'll be unsurprising, which is work in smaller increments, learn as you go, and then one that's maybe a little bit different from much of what we talked about, which is that empowering people to do things and completely disengaging are not the same thing. So to paint the picture, it's like 1998-ish, my first startup. And we had just raised some money, probably 99 actually, because I joined in 98. So we just raised some money, and the marketing team, right? Am I right? Used the money to acquire a lot of capacity for demand generation, which in 1998 was buying email lists. And to set the scene for anyone who's on the technical side, our entire production site was comprised of a single computer sitting under my desk, and our network access wasn't dial-up, but cable into the house sort of thing that we were working out of. So it was a very different time. There was no AWS, is what I'm trying to say. And sure enough, we launched out this campaign, and our machine basically melted. Like, we couldn't keep the site up for more than a couple minutes. And so what we concluded we should do is move into a data center so that we could have multiple machines serving traffic. We should move our operating system from Windows to Linux. We should move our database from, I think we were using SQL Server, the Microsoft SQL Server. We should move it to Oracle. We should buy a bunch of large Sun Microsystems boxes. You can tell it's 98 because no one does that anymore, to put all this stuff on. And we should do it all at the same time. So the piece that was really missing also, when we needed to learn something, we had to go to the bookstore and buy books. We couldn't just look online. Basically, we used some bulletin boards, but mostly we bought books, right? So Oracle was a huge gap in our understanding. And so we hired an Oracle consultant to build all the tooling to do the database migrations. Again, if you're listening to this, like you're already in the future, you know that doing all these things at the same time is an absolutely terrible idea. But we were going to do it all at once. And this guy came into our office every day and worked on the database migration. And so I'm in Toronto at the time. At some point, we planned the migration. We've purchased the space in the data center, which is in Reston, Virginia. Like nobody builds data centers anymore, but that's where they all were back then. We all get on a plane. We fly to Virginia. We set up shop and we turn off the current site so that we can start doing the migration. Nothing works. Like the whole database migration thing, like just none of it even makes any sense. It's like I'm sort of like I think I drank like 3 pots of coffee a day sort of thing at this time. Like this is early, adrenaline fused startup days. Luckily I was much younger then. And so I guess it still wasn't healthy or sustainable. And I basically had notes from this person on what we should do to migrate the database. And we get there and we're like, none of this makes any sense. It totally doesn't work. So we've taken the site down and we've started doing migration so we can't roll back. And a really good friend of mine and I are in a data center, which if you've ever been in is just an absolutely horrid experience. There's like air conditioners blowing air in and but the computers are generating all this heat and you just feel sick all the time. We were there 24/7 for about 7 days, building all of the tooling to do the actual migration to get the site back online. We would go out to the parking lot and just sleep on the concrete to get warmed up again, and then eat a bunch of chocolate covered espresso beans and go back into the data center. And we were doing it all basically live. Like this is the worst possible way of doing it. Never built this. But knowing what I know now, I have to say, like I could have made this whole thing go very, very well. Right? Like you could do different pieces at a time. You could do whatever. So eventually we do get the site back online. There's a hilarious second complete catastrophe where we had this counter in our database. And I don't know why anyone would ever do this, but there was one row in the database where every time someone came to the site, it incremented that number. And we were trying to fix something at the last minute. And I made an edit to that row, but didn't release my connection, and therefore no other process could update, which meant every customer trying to come in after that, after we finally got the site back up, still wasn't actually able to access the site. We thought we were done. I drove all my friends to the airport and drove back to the hotel to sleep for the first time in 7 days. And then someone called me 2 hours later and said, no one can access the site. I had to get back in the car, which was another terrible, terrible idea. Drive back to the data center, figure out what was wrong, and then hit commit on my transaction for anyone who understands SQL, and allow users to ultimately access the site. So 7 days of downtime on a planned migration because we basically didn't vet any of the work of, we were under deadlines and racing to get something done and whatever. And again, like I think we all know a lot more now, but if anyone who's listening to this and is like, sure, agile, sure, continuous delivery, doesn't remember anything else, like that's what it was like, right? You had to order machines online, get them shipped across the country, do all this planning work up front, and then you would show up and hope that something went well. And we joke about pulling all-nighters, but this is literally like, I can't remember the number of days, but 6 or 7 straight days. I was sick for like a month, I think, after that, because it was just like, the data center is disgusting. We were living off chocolate-covered espresso beans. Like none of it was good. And after months of just like drinking coffee nonstop and, working 24/7. I'm very thankful when often when I'm introducing folks to CircleCI, when I'm talking to customers about what we do, they're like, you're really excited about this. And I'm like, yeah, because you may not remember what it was like before. Most of our customers do, but like not everyone does. But then on the point that I made about disengaging, I said, oh, this is a person who knows what they're doing. They have tons of experience. They've done a bunch of stuff. I used the Oracle consultant example, but, I sort of just said, hey, this is what I need. Can you please build it and just create it? It was like, I implicitly trust you because you're a consultant versus again, incrementally, let's work this through. What do we really need? What are the priorities? Okay, how's it going? Like, we should be communicating. We should be sharing context and understanding. And you should be presenting to me, not you, but like someone that's working on something that I'm trying to organize. Here are the problems I'm running into. Hey, like, I'm the expert. Are you aware of this? This is going to be a real challenge here. How would we work around that? And, so both incremental in terms of how we design projects, but incremental in terms of how we communicate. Not, here's an end state, please get me there by this date, which is probably the best way to describe, what the engagement process was. But okay, this is the most important thing. Can we get this thing done? Let's figure that out. What did we learn? What more do we know about the problem we're trying to solve? And maybe at some point in that conversation, the flag would come up and say, why do we need to do this all at the same time? Like, what if we just kept the old database and put up some new web servers or whatever? I think all of that, it's a lot to take away from one story, but I still have nightmares about that experience. So like, it's definitely something that I've carried with me. I do still like chocolate covered espresso beans. I don't eat them in the volume that I was eating them then. But I think actually that was all about the fact that you couldn't take a cup of coffee into a room full of computers. Like, that's just a terrible idea, right? But you could bring in a bag of chocolate covered espresso beans. And I think when I eat them, I still think of those days.
Well, Rob, I'm glad you survived that level of caffeine and stress. Thank you for sharing. I love the focus on the small iterative changes and the communication. It's amazing. So, Rob, looking forward, introducing our season 3 theme, what is our focus and why are we focusing on it?
We're going to focus on great teams. Why we're going to focus on it because great teams are awesome. Like,
So true.
I think a huge part of what we landed at in the last season, talking about failure, and then it's, shifts into culture and how we communicate and how we work together, psychological safety. Like, these things are not just about failure or experimentation or learning. They're about how we work together. And I think there's so much to pull apart or unpack around what makes people work together really effectively, and then maybe a little bit about what prevents them from working together effectively, let's say. And so I'm fascinated by it as a leader, as a person. I use in all the things that I enjoy, I always use these as analogies. Like, I will go to a live music performance and spend half my time looking at the dynamics between the people on the stage, trying to figure out, like, how do they communicate so well? Are they happy together? Like, what creates this environment in which they've created this amazing art? I can't stop thinking about it. And so I'm excited to talk to some folks about it and get other people's perspectives.
Rob, I'm super excited about this topic of teams. We already have a few people scheduled. We can't say who they are yet, but the season will be premiering in January of 2023. So we're going to be taking a little break for the holidays here. If there's someone that you want us to interview for this topic, reach out to us on Twitter at CircleCI. And of course, if you enjoyed this podcast, share it with your friends. Subscribe on your platform of choice. And Rob, thank you so much for joining me today.
Julia, thanks for running the show. Thanks for everything you do behind the scenes. I'm glad to finally have you on an episode. And for anyone who can't figure it out, you get to hear Julia every week when you hear the opening jingle.
Oh, now you're embarrassing me. All right, everybody, have a great week.
If you're looking to build a trusted ship, tune in, let's confidently commit.